Holy shit. One of the problems with the story, as good at FF14's, is that all good things must eventually come to an end. With Endwalker bringing the 10-year journey to a close, it would be fair enough to assume that the team would be like out of juice, right? After that kind of crescendo, that kind of finale, you would expect that's it, right? It's all downhill from here. At least that was like the fear for me and quite a number of other people. 6.1 was good, right? But it was mostly set up, so we couldn't judge from 6.1 that, you know, FF14 is still getting better. But now we've seen what they're capable of when they're introducing new characters, when they're bringing us to new places, and I guess realistically telling us new stories. And let me tell you, when I finished, I had to sit there for a while. I just had to sit there and go, are they that goddamn good? And the answer is, now that I've mulled on it, yes, they definitely are. And it wasn't because they this blew me away with any individual element, or wasn't because it was uniquely incredible, oh my god, this is the best patch ever. But it was just because every single thing was normal. Everything was normal. It was run-of-the-mill content. Hey, here's a new character. Hey, here's a new story. Hey, here's stuff. But it was the implementation that really got me. It was mechanically perfect. You know how a really good comedian can tell a really mundane story, but if they've honed their craft, if they're a good storyteller, they can leave a room absolutely split with laughter anyway, even if it's not that funny. It's all in the execution. 6.2 proved that the team is that skilled. Obviously not a comedy, but they are that good. Every scene had me either smiling or laughing at how clever it was. How much I'm just going, oh, of course you did that. That's genius. Some of it's in dialogue, some of it's in story, but a lot of it is in camera shots and environment design. It seems that every single element of these patches, every single drop, is considered for maximum impact. It's a masterclass. It's genuinely a masterclass in story. Of course, you start the same way we always do, a start of patch, little blast of familiar warmth, and that's always a safe way to open up. But the first thing I noticed is something that's actually kind of obvious in hindsight. They're really willing to trust us that we don't get bored. The first thing, and I actually counted this, the first thing we do in the MSQ is spend 6 minutes showing the process of Varshan getting an upgraded body. That's it. They obviously, they weave in some cute stuff between him and his guards, that kind of, I'm always a little brother to you all, very, very lovely. As well as letting us know that, Estinian is helping train the guards because, he found a kinship with Radzatan, all that stuff's great. And you'll notice in this video, I didn't play around trying to get you engaged. I assume you'd be bored and leave, because that's how the modern world works. But clearly the FF team are happy to pace things, I guess classically is how I could put it. And even after that, it was still another 4 or 5 minutes of just prep, just hear some stuff talking. But it's all good. And I'll be the first to admit, when Answer started playing that piano version and Stola was talking about Heidelin, I felt all those emotions stir up again. All of that 6.0 stuff, all of that just hit me again, even if it felt a little bit like a non sequitur. And the same with the Ironworks lads. Seeing Biggs, Wedge and Sid, I just feel warm inside. But that's the power of the hundreds of hours of story in FF. You spend so much time seeing the same characters, hearing the same music, that's very important. They build up this massive, this bank of stored emotions, a stored experience, and they can draw it out at any time they like, and they're getting really, really damn good at it. Of course, it's immediately gameplay time then. The Fell Court of Troya was a pretty, run-of-the-mill dungeon, all things considered, but it was sound, it was good, it was fine, like I said, normal. Having an almost entirely AoE boss was pretty new to me, and I'm not really sure I like it, just because, putting down Doton's fine, Hellfrog Medium, fine, but just pressing 2 buttons is a bit, nah, constantly. But the thing about the dungeon was the atmosphere was perfect. It's such a beautiful place, a little bit dark, but still a beautiful place, and the music was just perfect, just basically everything they needed to do. It actually felt a little bit like a variation on the Shadows of Mach vibes, or Va as it should be, but that's a whole different story. The Void Scent, right, they're obsessed with hierarchy, they lean into the stereotypes of kings and queens and lords, as we saw with, Queen Skaha. All that stuff was there, but now they're actually building on it more. And Troya was a sad, almost haunted version of that in a sense, where there was a sadness to Beatrice that you could tell. And that's where the duty support stuff really starts to shine, because obviously, you bring your allies into the dungeon and they're calling out things to pay attention to, the environment that they've set up, like the painting. So Stola and Estinian talk about how the painting is probably a Beatrice, and that's really strong overall. So it's not like this kind of environmental storytelling, which I think people kind of meme on sometimes, but it's more about setting up the general theme. Of course, Beatrice feels like she's holding on to her past, holding on to her status in that castle. It's, and the painting of not her now, but how she used to be. But it turns out that's obviously thematically important. And Beatrice herself, despite being short-lived, is a pretty cool character, especially in her fight. Those gaze attack rings kind of woke me up a little bit. I was definitely kind of on cruise control until I saw those, went, oh shit. And as much as they're, obviously they've done a great job with the orange indicators, the AoE stuff that don't stand here things, they're definitely starting to weave more natural indicators into, like her eye or gaze thing that covers the floor. That's a very natural form as opposed to orange overlays, and it's quite nice. But of course, the story is kind of more important than that, at least at the minute, and her last bit of dialogue communicates an awful lot about what the Void is doing, what the 13th and the Void are like, before anyone tells us. It's a dog-eat-dog world, and we've spooked her. She doesn't want to be eaten. The Scarmillion fight was also a pretty solid fight in the dungeon, and that new FF4 battle music is, it's good. It's very good. But the fun thing is, for anyone familiar with FF4, the fact that based on some of his dialogue and the fact that he summons zombies, it was less of a wink wink nudge nudge kind of deal and more a straight up slap to the face for what was coming next and what Scar's role was going to be. But the thing that I loved was immediately tracking back through the dungeon area after an MSQ. It immediately made it feel like it was our own base camp, because it was. The Void Center was still there, but we're the big dog in the house, so it's ours now. So we got to viscerally experience what it's like in the 13th. Power, Dominion, Ether, those are the most important things, and we're the biggest people in the building, so it's ours. Then, of course, they get to spend all this time teaching us that the Void Center aren't mindless by having to at least try to speak with a different variety of them. They have all their emotions, they have their thoughts, their feelings, they're characterized. It's also a pretty effective reuse of resources, because I remember saying I didn't expect us to go to the 13th physically, outside of dungeons, because that's kind of, a lot of resources. But they gave us the dungeon and then said, you can go around here freely. And that kind of did let us explore the 13th quite nicely. And I was like, they're getting very smart. They're definitely getting smart. Of course, the best thing about this entire patch is definitely Zero. The meeting was a little bit dramatic, and I think a little bit too much of a coincidence that, Stoll is like, hey, by the way, remember this crystal? You've got it now. Maybe this will be useful. And then it's useful an hour later. But kind of, that's fine because they were getting it out of the way. But the whole dialogue between Zero about Xenos, and we get to confirm again how he felt about us, but also how we felt about him and his idea of us as friend. That was a nice touch to kind of expand upon the, that was an important thing, and people have definitely feelings about Xenos that I think the developers expected to be more one tone, but then they're kind of going, okay, well, we have choice. We can talk about this in the retrospective way. So now you get to give more detail on that. And that's a great way of kind of that almost railroading people into an experience. And they pulled that back. It's genuinely again, it's clever, it's smart, and I very much appreciate it trying to characterize my own Warrior of Light. Now, Zero herself being edgy loner vibes is a little bit tropey, but they very quickly kind of dispel that, or if not dispel it, they use it properly. Because then they have, I think, the most standard technique they have in their playbook. Step 1, amazing voice actor, done. Step 2, a speech kind of introduction that's a combination of exposition and character background in a way that feels very theatrical, because it's set to Soken's beautiful music. And then we even have the name Zero, how Stola kind of explained it, oh yeah, well, Zero, you mean nothing. No, it's actually a new beginning. It means possibility. That's really it's really goofy, right? It's really tropey, but it's that straight to the heart with earnest JRPG kind of dialogue that I think really, I don't know. It happened and I was like, oh, you fuckers, you're so smart. I don't care that this is kind of silly, because I'm completely there for it. And they know exactly when they're allowed to do that and when they're not, which is very, very fun to me. Then, of course, the solo duty was great. Scar coming back wasn't a surprise, because, it's the only thing people remember about him in FF4, because bosses there were just kind of whatever, unless they were the main one. But it was it was just cool, because they used it, and this is hey, FF4 reference. What they could have done is, whatever. But what they did do is, let's use this as a reason to have a really cool fight. a really cool fight that does a whole variety of things towards the plot, towards characters, towards like gameplay. And it was like a really clever use of possibility. They got to reuse a dungeon boss in a way that provides drama and still feels like dangerous to the cast, even though we completely murked him earlier because, the core conceit. It teaches us about that core conceit of the 13th, the nature of Void Scent, all the rebirth, the quick revival, all that stuff, like, the opposite of passivity is activity, so, all that soul stuff. And it was also a perfect vehicle for Zero to start to feel like one of the party, also show off how cool she is, also intrigue us with her weird power, and then also get moments of Y'shtola being kind of smug and smart as a bonus. All in the 20-minute section of, like, fun gameplay. It's basically almost perfect content, really. It's like, by the end of it, you know so much more about how the world works, you know so much more about Zero, and, she's clearly willing to help for, like, a fairly weak trade. Her name, what's the name worth? She's like, oh yeah, that ticks the box, now I'm ready to fight, but she's still adamant about getting paid. And it's like a non-stop barrage to her, oh yeah, this world is all about power. They will not let us forget that. But now, the highlight of this patch. It was definitely Zero's Domain. I liked basically all of it, but Zero's Domain is absolutely gorgeous. Especially because it's so clearly wrecked and what that means for like the character and the story and stuff like that. Even getting there, right? It had me in awe because the writers know what parts are valuable for the MSQ. They could have had Zero teleport us there, but instead they went to the effort of giving us more detail about the world. Okay, the Void Scent who can't fly have to use mounts. That's cool. But then the mounts are Void Scent, so kind of like people. So they work in exchange for ether. And then even like the smaller touches, okay? So Zero didn't ask to split the bill for what's effectively a taxi, but she paid it all herself. Like, she's very matter of fact and very, ether is very important, but she's also not stingy. And that's kind of like, maybe it's just, maybe they didn't superintend that, but if they did, that's really cool. That's a little bit of character. That's kind of the whole principle of show, don't tell. And they show us a lot, all the time. Even when we land in her domain, it's just so cool. It's full of these misfits, these pariahs, as Y'shtola says, and she commands respect. But unlike the other strong Void Scent, like, the fourth Archfiend and stuff, she doesn't demand the dominion or the servitude. She actively, in her own space, she actively refuses the rules of this world. But then when she's dealing with us, she's very strict about them. So it's like, there's that little, I guess, internal inconsistency with her that kind of shows a lot of her character, where maybe she doesn't agree with the rules, so when she has control, she will ignore them. But whenever she's not in control, she kind of has to put on that bluster and go, oh no, I'll only do this if you pay, we have to live by these laws, give me ether or I'm not helping. But then you get to her home and she's like, everyone can say, it's fine, don't worry about it. And that's like, it's small, it's a small touch, but it's really, really nice. Honestly, just walking around the domain talking to her was fun, as well as kind of basking in the melancholy kind of vibes of the BGM. But whenever she explains what domains are, that constructs kind of built for memory around the individual, that's when you kind of get to think back about the difference between the two places. They really hit home. So there's the perfectly crystallized memory of Troya, right? It's got its lords, it's got its servants, it's got this place, it's, it's immaculate, it's clearly, a human settlement like a king or whatever a queen was in. And then that's, all the paintings are intact. They're not new, they're intact the way things used to be. And that's Troya. But Zero's domain then is clearly like, I guess it kind of looks a lot like Alamigo in a way, but that ravaged by war, ravaged by the darkness. So you can kind of get, Zero's trapped in this dark past and should have it no other way, versus Beatrice, who's kind of languishing in her past kind of willingly because it was like nostalgic. And those are just little tiny details of like, again, the environment telling the story. That's like, this is why the MSQs, like, you might not notice it, but I think that's why people play the MSQ and go, oh, this is why everything feels good, because the details are right. Then Zero obviously goes in and starts talking about like the sense of self, how Void Scent need to keep who they are in mind, and the kind of idea of meditating on identity to make sure it's there. That's clearly them building for more stories, and that's really good. Clearly, like Zero herself, she values being different and being herself, despite the suffering that obviously entails and her like stoic kind of approach to it, but it implies that others lose themselves. And then they don't let that rest, right? They go, here's a concept, we're going to show you, we're going to tell you a little bit about it, and then, bam, here's a small story that's like fairy tale in nature, really small, really short, but it hits hard. Farfarella and Siriato. two friends, they struggle together, but obviously it goes wrong. And then it shows us directly what Zero meant about losing that sense of self. Like, it shows off how terrifying living in the 13th is when you're weak. And it's a hard-hitting allegory for suicide and giving up. That's what it is. It's just, life is too hard. I choose another option. And that was just a small little story, but it really drives home just how brutal this is. Same way with the stuff with War and Stormblood. It's like, no, they don't shy away from that kind of brutal, no, this is not a good time. This is not a good time. And they do it so small, so in such a cute little way. Not literally cute, but you know what I mean, like kind of the small scale way that just hits immediately and then goes, okay, well, now you understand that concept, we can move on. It's really good for the emotional exploration instead of just the rational or the logical. It's really smart that way. Especially because I think that concept's going to be very, very important in the future, probably for Golbez. But interesting enough, it actually gave me Majora's Mask vibes as well. I don't know if anyone else got that, but it's like that psychologically intrusive, I wouldn't call it horror, but spookiness. It just kind of hits hard in a way. You're like, oh, I feel off now. That's an enjoyable feeling, I guess, for most. But of course, the law of good pacing dictates it's time for combat. And the trial, Barbaricia's entrance was so strong. It's another example of a villain just playing by the rules of the world, but in a way that felt heartless. You know, it contrasted Barbaricia and Zero, both strong. Zero could have eaten all of that domain and went, sure, fine, whatever, doesn't matter. But she didn't. She kind of cares about, like, the individual and people. Well, Barbaricia just sees them as, oh, your food, oh, your sustenance, oh, your power for me to absorb. And that's just like, it's classic, but it is just easy. Hey, here's a villain. There you go. Contrast to your protagonist. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. It also kind of shows that she's strong-willed enough to like eat little dudes and not like lose her sense of self. And then her domain tells its own story, which is it's all her hair, so she's maybe like narcissistic or something, or she cares only about herself, and that's like her memories or herself and her power. There were some buildings, but they weren't like shown off or anything, so it's just a little bit of like, yeah, this is character through environment, because we decided to set up that the environment like has the importance for character. It's just like everything is a vehicle for more character and more story, and that's what makes it good. Of course, the whole lead up to the trial was wonderful too, with the fight in the back of the mount, although us not being allowed to fight because we're the MMO main characters, a bit kind of scuffed, but the fight was great. It was wonderful. The hair tether was a great twist for that slow. The phase transition was beautiful. The Japanese were all like comparing her online to the female Titan from Attack on Titan, and you can see why. It's like the same idea. I got a couple like Luffy vibes and stuff like that, but it's a really good phase transition. The swap between character design is like really smart, kind of shows who she is a little bit more. And that phase 2 was just chaotic. I need to start playing with like a heart rate tracker or like watch my watch or something, because I was definitely panicked a lot. It was great. I can't wait to do it next year. It's gonna be wonderful. I hope it's wonderful. Anyway, of course, it is then time for the Comedown, because it's not an MSQ without about an hour at the end of just talking, doing character work, setting up next patch. It's a lot of dialogue, but it's all great. It's absolutely 10 out of 10 content. We get to bring Zero back to our nicer home. We get to see like how she is in this context. We get that full fish out of water vibe, which has like the comedy elements as well as the new perspective that we take for granted, like kids, friends playing. We kind of forget how important that is, but obviously Zero's no idea. So through her eyes, we get to experience it again. And obviously the, half an hour at the dinner table of pure exposition and emotion. The joy I felt when she took the first bite out of that apple, and then later when she ate the other one unprompted, just kind of idly when talking, that was just wonderful. And then the concern and the sadness when she starts to talk about not even wanting to save her world the 13th, it's all just like, it's written beautifully, it's delivered beautifully. And this is when the team's consistent focus on improving camera work, character acting, writing, like dialogue stuff, that stuff starts to really stand out. The one thing that like I was taken aback by how much it affected me, but when she's alone in her room and the camera lingers on her in the end, so she just, does a little looking around and then just kind of looks around and goes, shakes her head. She's clearly shaking whatever that thought was out of her head. And that was just like, oh, you didn't need to do that. You didn't need that. You could have faded to black at any point in time. But they wanted to show us that. They wanted to show us who Zero is. And it worked because I absolutely love her to pieces. I did well before that because she's so cool, but regardless, it's like they can basically speedrun character building through all of these really cool tricks that they've learned. I mean, the two bits were first when she says, you know, whenever we're going back, we need to come with her. You're like, absolutely, 100%. We're friends now, work away. And then again later when she's a little lighthearted at the end saying, you know, she'll take the apple for a deposit. That was like, you see like the entire arc of I'm, you know, lonely, sad, edgy, depressed. I don't know what friends are. And over the course of literally just 4 hours, and you know, 4 hours is long enough if you consider a movie being like 90 minutes or whatever, but it's still like 4 hours of gameplay and MMO gameplay at that. And they still managed to tell us it's full speedrun mode, and it's really, it's honestly, it's like fascinating to look at the execution as well as get the experience of it as well. Between all that and then like the conversation in the orchard about like the orphanage, how Estinian visits, the way she speaks to the kids, it's like that's some of the best slice of life I've ever experienced. And I watch a lot of girls doing nothing anime, but it deepens the relationship with these characters way more than any amount of combat or drama and questing actually could. And I think the other thing is I love the science. The attitude that Ishtola and Estinian bring, even though they definitely sometimes lack a bit of like charisma together, that idea of just the 13th's in trouble, we're going to fix it. What do you mean you're going to fix it? We're going to fix it. We'll find a way to fix it. That's the attitude you need to bring to life, I think. The kind of one life, it's worth an attempt energy. And of course, we're still not done because 4 hours of heavy story, trial, you know, dungeon combat, it can't end without a massive brain wrinkler. Golbez is obviously, as a villain, still in his like early setup phase. We don't know much about him. He's kind of pointless at the minute. But that final section, that final cutscene was way too much of an explosive revelation. A friend and I were talking about what everything could mean, and we were kind of stumped. Our current working theory is that Golbez killed the 13th Watcher on the moon and then devoured that shard of Zodiac. Kind of fits with some of the FF4 stuff. But we have no idea what his goals could be outside of maybe fix the 13th, maybe? But like, the questions are, did eating Zodiac, you know, impact his sense of self considering the power? Was that little Farfarello and Siriato story actually setting us up to understand Golbez and like empathize with him and see what he's struggling through in his quest for power? Because power involves eating others. Why did he not eat Asdaya himself? Stuff like that. I have no idea, but after this patch, I completely trust it will be excellent. And at the end of the day, 6.2 was called Buried Memory or Forbidden Memory in Japanese, and it was about really classical like human concepts. The sense of self versus losing sight of yourself, all in the rules of an unfair world. I think we've all kind of felt that. It started to ask like, what is the self? Are you your memories? Are you your past? You can linger in memory in the past nostalgically like Beatrice did. You can feel trapped in it like Zero seemed to be, or you can ignore it and push your own ambition at the cost of seemingly everything like Golbez and his 4 Archfiends seem to want. So I do wonder what we'll learn about their past, but before I leave you, there's one final tidbit. The final villain of Final Fantasy IV was called Zeromus. Zeromus. Nothing's an accident, and I am very, very concerned about just how much I've immediately fallen in love with Zero, because I'm not sure I trust him not to break my heart. That's all I have for you today. Do you agree with what I'm kind of saying? I think the 6.2 was really, really, like, honestly exceptional as far as I'm concerned. But in those little ways that we'll feel it in 6.3 or 6.4. In the same way that like 5.1 and 2 were kind of like slow, and then 5.3 hit, you know, to the edge, hit all in that moment, and you're like, this is the best content I've ever experienced in my life. Holy shit. It's like, I feel like they have all the parts they need. They can build something that good again, likely, because they've honed their craft. They've mastered the ability to go, we know how to write characters. We know how to take, like, I guess, grand classical concepts that, like, everyone understands. Because everyone, like, reads, like, a Shakespeare or reads, like, the proper classics back in the day. And they kind of go, it's a wee bit heavy, but I get it. It's human stories, small-scale human stories. But the way they do it is they ground it always in the characters, in the experience, in the dialogue. You get to feel everything through, especially when the English voice cast go at it. They're so good. Zero's voice actor, I didn't check who it was, but absolutely fantastic. You can feel like everything they're feeling through every single step. For every single step of the way you feel it. And it's it's something else. It's genuinely something else. I'm amazed they can keep going. I dread the day they kind of falter in quality, but I hope that's a long way out. I really do. And I haven't even done any other content 6.2 yet, so I'll have to go get to that and get some videos out. So thank you very much for watching, and I will absolutely see you very, very soon.